author, columnist, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, talk show host, and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast, courtesy of the Radio America Network, from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I am, as always, your host, Mark Angelides. Now, as far as the news stories that have dominated the week, initially we saw President Trump lay down the law at the United Nations, calling out all the member states over the so-called green energy agenda, the mass uncontrolled immigration that has so beset Western nations, and all this amid the backdrop of three prominent nations, Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom, all declaring that they want to recognize an as of yet undefined Palestinian state. And while these geopolitical happenings should be top of each news hour, what was it that really dominated? Yes, you've guessed it, it was Jimmy Kimmel and his on-again, off-again relationship with ABC Disney. After being suspended indefinitely, allegedly under pressure from the FCC, Jimmy Kimmel is back on the airwaves, albeit a little more contrite and to a slightly smaller audience. And yet, something sticks out, and that's that the legacy media is still pushing the idea that Donald Trump and Brendan Carr of the FCC is behind the whole thing, and not, in fact, the affiliates who've refused to bring back the late-night show host to their waiting audiences. So for now, he's back in roughly 75% of the markets. But hot on the heels of that is a new piece of proposed legislation spearheaded by certain Democrats in Congress that promises to reinforce the First Amendment. But the question is, will more words create less clarity? We're going to examine all that and a whole lot more on today's show. Now, please remember, Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com. You can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. And you're here on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides, and we're very fortunate to have with us today Liberty Nation's editor-at-large, Mr. James Fight. Thanks for being here, Jim.
Nice to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
So Jim covers everything on LibertyNation.com of a congressional bent, a constitutional bent. He's a wealth of knowledge in how the processes work and don't work through the halls of power. And there's a particular upcoming bill that I want to discuss today, Jim, and that is the NOPE Act. I enjoy it as much for its brevity of name as I do for anything else, but the NOPE Act, that's N-O-P-E, give us an overview, Jim. What is it?
Well, yeah, I love the name too. It's so the NOPE Act is not an actual bill that we have a text for yet. I mean, they haven't actually introduced it, so there's a lot of potential here. But the long form of the name is the No Political Enemies Act, which that sounds good. That sounds benign.
Yep.
As these often do. And so the argument that they're making here, this is a primarily Democrat-backed bill. Will allegedly be introduced by Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut and Jason Crow from Colorado in the House. And but so this is kind of a backlash to the firing of Jimmy Kimmel, is what it really is. And so their idea is to extend the safeguards of free speech to media outlets and other organizations, so that they're protected as well as individuals, and to keep any president, they say, Republican or Democrat, to keep any presidential administration from which we'll see, but to keep them from being able to target and weaponize the any branch of the executive government, like weaponizing the DOJ and the FBI, which sounds oddly familiar, doesn't it?
It does indeed. So the funny thing is that now I've really, really dug into this. Now I don't have, as they say, I don't have a dog in this fight, and this is not a dog fighting show either, for that matter, because I love dogs. But I've dug so deeply into this Jimmy Kimmel situation that they're basing this proposed legislation on. And I don't see any way in which government can make a difference in this, nor can I see a way why it should. Because I'll walk everybody through this. I know, Jim, you've read my stuff.
We're gonna peel back the layers.
We're gonna peel back the layers and get a big old onion in there. It's the onion, sir. No, the Full Metal Jacket quote. Anyway, so what happened here was you had Jimmy Kimmel go off on a monologue saying that MAGA Republicans tried to cover up the fact that the alleged shooter of Charlie Kirk was not one of their own. Okay.
Kind of. I mean, I could see you making the argument that he didn't say necessarily that they're saying he was, or that he wasn't necessarily saying that he was a MAGA person, that he was just.
It depends what the definition of is, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Look, that's the feel you get. But I mean, his exact wording, I guess there's a little wiggle room.
So what happened was, after that first, denunciation of the, MAGA extremists, as he sees them, Nexstar, which is the broadcaster that carries ABC shows across a range of geographic areas, they said that, hey, this is not conducive. This kind of stuff, it's not conducive to what we want to spread out to our diverse range of audience. And apparently also Sinclair, which also does these things, had the same words for ABC. And then, as we found out later, apparently Jimmy Kimmel was going to double down on it and refuse to on his next broadcast. But anyway, Nexstar said that they would not be willing to carry that show anymore, which would affect, obviously, their advertising, their bottom line, that phrase.
Oh, for sure. That's dozens of networks, by the way.
Dozens of networks. I mean, I think if you count up Nexstar and Sinclair, you're probably talking 30 to 30-ish% of every penny they get is going to be through those markets. And so, Jimmy Kimmel, whose ratings were worse than Stephen Colbert already, and Stephen Colbert was losing his network $40 million a year, as we found out, they decided to get rid of him. Now, where does the government come into it? Sorry, long story too short here, right? Or too long for the short story. Brendan Carr, chair of the FCC, he put out a warning to ABC, saying basically they've got to do something. Now, why would he do that? Would he do that because he loves the president so much, and he thought, hey, somebody's insulting people that are tangential to the president? Well, no. And so I dug really far into this. And so there's so the FCC was created in 1934 under FDR, right? And it's got a series of rules that have certainly been amended over time. I think it was an outgrowth of the radio communications. I guess that'd be an agency under it, but then it became the FCC. And so they have, if somebody on one of their broadcast channels, now people obviously criticize it, like they say, well, why aren't we getting the same treatment for Fox News? Why aren't we getting the same thing for CNN? Well, they're not broadcast, right? They're cable. And so what they have for broadcast is, if there's a crime or a catastrophe, now this is paraphrased, but if there's a crime or a catastrophe, you're not allowed to give false information about a crime or catastrophe.
If this is the hoax rule. Yeah.
Yes. If it could result in public harm. Public harm's the key word there. Now that's debated over in courts all the time, public harm. But that's the first part. So if it does qualify that, if there is, and there is, obviously there was a crime, Charlie Kirk being murdered. Was there a lie or false information about that? Pretty much, right? I think we can all agree that Jimmy Kimmel's labeling of the situation was dishonest.
Yeah, and I'd point out real quick that even though I'm not really coming to his defense, but I did want to point out that the verbatim quote that he made could be argued that he wasn't necessarily saying that. I want to point out he didn't argue that he wasn't saying that. So, there you go.
Yeah, that kind of sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But then, so if there's the public harm thing, which could be, as per the FCC rules, there, it could be something that could lead to some kind of unrest or violence or things. Now, we've seen that the U.S. is a tinderbox about certain things over, like somebody dying. We've seen this in 2020. The whole country went up in flames. Now, so was there a chance that lying about the murder of somebody could cause unrest? Absolutely. Unless the very people who are likely going to sue Donald Trump admit that political violence and unrest and rioting only comes from the political left. Unless they're willing to admit that in court, I don't see how they really have a case on it. Because otherwise they'd have to admit that, well, yes, but the right wouldn't do it. They'd have to admit that. Otherwise, there is a risk of public harm. And so that is why Brendan Carr would have reached out and spoke. Now, I disagree that he should have done it public. I think that was a terrible, terrible move. I think that was just such a bad mistake. But did he have the responsibility under, and you can agree or disagree with the regulations for the FCC, but did he have responsibility under the current regulations of the FCC to at least notify ABC that, hey, as he said, we're going to have to do some work if you don't do something about this? The answer to that is clearly yes, right?
Yeah, I agree. Well, and like you said, that it looks like Kimmel was going to double down.
Yeah. We're going to carry on talking about this and the NOPE Act after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and Jim Fight remains Jim Fight, continuing our conversation on the upcoming NOPE Act and what happened with Jimmy Kimmel and ABC. So earlier in the show, we were just talking about, we've gone through how all the FCC regulations and why Brendan Carr, whether he did it right or not, had a responsibility to at least reach out to ABC and probably shouldn't have done it publicly. Now, with all that in mind, let's bring that back to the NOPE Act, Jim.
Yeah. So despite all of what we've discussed, the congressional Democrats behind this bill, well, and much of the progressive left, I mean, this is the narrative that's being spun right now, is Jimmy Kimmel was only fired because the Trump administration targeted them, and ABC was like, ooh, and they caved, and because they didn't want that smoke. But anyways, so this act, there's a lot of potential here. It's like I said, we don't have an actual bill already in place. So what we have is a series of sound bites, basically. Reaffirming our Constitution and laws prohibiting the president from weaponizing government against people who disagree with the administration. That sure sounds good. I don't know what it's going to turn out to actually be, though, right? Somehow it's going to neuter the FCC. That's the only thing. I mean, it would have to. I don't know that it actually statutorily could, but
yeah, well, the FCC, as we discussed earlier in the show, the rules of the FCC state that somebody should have reached out from the FCC to ABC on what they were doing. So neutering that, I mean, it would make it, if you're new to the FCC, you've got everything then becomes basically cable news, which is not a bad. It is either not a bad thing or it is a bad thing, depending on your position. But what they're essentially talking about is gutting the teeth of an agency, I think. Yeah,
pretty much. Which is, I mean, and it's kind of an odd. It strikes me as an odd position.
Yeah.
For the statist party to do.
Very much so. Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it.
It's a government. It makes me think that it makes me think of that meme with Willem Dafoe as he was playing in the Spider-Man movie. He played the Green Goblin.
I'm something of a statist myself.
Yeah. It was like I'm something of a scientist myself. It was like so. Yeah. But right. I knew you'd know the meme. But
absolutely.
So yielded
my meme knowledge.
Right. The DOJ, the FBI, the IRS. All of these agencies cannot be used to silence people for criticizing the government. with constitutionally protected speech. And that sounds awesome. The problem is the people, I mean, these are the same people that were behind the IRS targeting conservative outlets,
Yeah.
under the previous administration.
Yeah. And the Facebook files, the Twitter papers.
Yep.
That was a direct involvement, direct requests from the administration, even in the White House, to take down material. But nary a peep, one might say.
Yeah.
Nary a peep from the same people who are now saying this. And I wonder, just if here's a deal for them. Here's a deal for them, the people who are putting this together. Do you think they'd take it, Jim? I'll take a yes or no answer. You can have this legislation. It kicks in as soon as there's a Democratic president in office. Do you think they would take that deal?
Not a chance.
So that kind of gives you the idea. Now, the question is, Jim, so this NOPE Act, N-O-P-E Act, isn't that already the First Amendment?
That's the interesting thing, is that that is everything they point out about protecting free speech, and the government shouldn't be allowed to persecute you for your speech. You should have the right to disagree with the government. That is the First Amendment. So mechanically, that's the big question. Yeah. Mechanically, what are they going to put in the legislation that changes the status quo? And is that going to somehow better protect that constitutional liberty of free expression? And if only Congress, and I'll say this in a very nonpartisan way, this goes for Republicans and Democrats, but if only Congress were half as good at protecting the Constitution as they are at coming up with clever names.
Oh yeah. That expensive old Affordable Care Act, right?
Yeah,
that's didn't turn out to be so affordable. But yeah, so you've got this situation. It's an add-on to the First Amendment, but really only does what the First Amendment says anyway. And I wonder if it's not a convoluting of the First Amendment, because there are a lot of people who would say, for example, and here's another meme, I'll throw one back to you. Right. Men with a time machine. They go back and they meet the founding fathers and say, write the Second Amendment like I'm an idiot 5-year-old.
Yep.
So to really clarify things. And it's not, I don't think adding more words to something would necessarily make it any clearer. So you've got the First Amendment, and then you add this on and say, well, it's going to bolster the First Amendment. Is it, or is it just going to confuse things? I do wonder if what's better off is maybe just restating, hey, this is the First Amendment. I mean, the Constitution is a marvel of a document in so many ways.
There's another option too here, is that this is just pure virtue signaling, and it will have no real practical effect.
Oh, you mean like Congress itself? Jim, we're going to keep an eye on this on the pages of libertynation.com. Please do go and check out Jim's writing. Thanks for being here.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, head coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're very fortunate to have with us Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, Mr. Dave Patson, to talk about the recent developments in the recognition of a Palestinian state. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Thank you, Mark. Happy to be with you.
So, Dave, let's for people who've studiously and probably wisely avoided the news this week, we've had Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia come together to recognize I guess the right for a Palestinian state, which further pushes the idea of a two-state solution forward. What does that involve from the three parties there? What are they saying?
Well, I think that it's a recognition of a mythology, actually.
Yes.
I mean, let's face it. Where is Palestine? Can you send letters to its capital? Can you send letters to its president or its leader, its primary leader? I mean, you have to send 12 separate letters to all of the factions who think they represent Palestine. This is madness. It clearly didn't work back when Jimmy Carter was thinking about this, and it's not likely to work now. There's just no such thing as a Palestinian state.
Right. So I guess what the Ukraine, sorry, the UK. So I get them confused because they spend the British money. You get the UK, Australia, and Canada,
And a lot of it.
a lot of it. What they're saying is that there should be the existence of a Palestinian state. Now there's been throughout since the 1940s. There's been areas that are for Palestinians, but there's been a big series of wars, right? That have essentially back and forth the territory there, and you end up with the situation that we have today. Is that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was some chance of it in 1967, but Israel was invaded by Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, so that kind of put a pow on that idea then. And again, in 1973, I think that Golda Meir might have entertained at least some sort of a region for the Palestinians. But of course, they decided to cause a ruckus then, and that kind of went away. And it just seems as though the Palestinian side has no cohesive way of thinking about themselves, except they want to be a Palestinian state. Okay, what does that mean? Well, you don't have anybody who can agree on what a Palestinian state looks like. And especially none of its neighbors wants to give up land to accommodate such a place.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because during the height of, I guess, what many people would call the Gaza crisis, and it certainly is a terrible situation on the ground there. So many of its neighboring countries said we're not taking any Palestinians in, and I believe, I might have this wrong, but I believe the reason was because they wouldn't know who were terrorists.
Oh. So they should stay in Israel so that Israelis won't know who are terrorists.
You can kind of see their point. You know, why take them in if you don't know who they are? I mean, sure, the Western nations have been doing just that since about 2015 with the migrant crisis. But yeah, so you're in this situation where you have three, and they are important world leaders. Mark Carney, Anthony Albanese, and Sir Keir Starmer. And they've basically decided that this is what we want for the Palestinian people. It's a state that exists, presumably side by side with Israel. Now, just let's do a little thought experiment here, Dave. Isn't that what the terrorists on October 7th wanted?
Well, it's difficult to divine what the terrorists on October 7th really wanted. From what they said, what they wanted was to kill as many as Israelis as they possibly could and take hostages. That's what they said they wanted.
Right. So, well, that ruins my thought experiment because you gave such a detailed answer. But let's continue with the whole process of the point I was trying to make. So you've got terrorists, actual terrorists, and they're engaging in terrorism to achieve their aim of either A and B, killing as many Israelis as they possibly could, but also they're doing it for Palestinian liberation, as they say. Isn't what's just happened, isn't this almost a gift to Hamas? To say that, you've done this, and because of what you've done, because of what Israel's done in retaliation, we are now going to support the very thing that put you on this murderous path in the first place.
Yeah, it does seem a bit. It's a serpentine logic at best, but look at it from Israel's perspective. Okay, they agree to a two-state. Now. And in fact, they're able to carve out some portion of geography for the neighboring Palestinian state. Now they have an organized Palestinian state designed specifically to destroy Israel. on its border. And now it has all of the wonderful aspects of a country. They get foreign aid, they get all kinds of deference. I don't think that's a great idea for Israel. And I don't think Israel thinks it's a great idea either.
Yeah, what were Benjamin Netanyahu's first reactions to this?
I think it was negative. I would
Really?
I think that what I just said was pretty much his point of view, and it's true. I mean, the Palestinian state would be set up for the sole purpose of destroying Israel, because that's what they believe. They grow up believing it, they grow old believing it, and they die believing it.
Yeah, there's to some who might say that's a misrepresentation or hyperbole. That really is what Hamas wants, and Hamas is the ruling party there, as it were.
How about just as let's continue the thought experiment.
Sure.
How about if Netanyahu said, okay, we have a condition for developing a Palestinian state. You guarantee us that Hamas is destroyed to the very last person, that they will never raise their ugly Hydra head again. And we'll consider a Palestinian state.
Yeah, where do you think that's going to go?
Well, they'll say, well, we can't do that. Well, then we can't agree to a Palestinian state, because as long as Hamas is any kind of a functioning organization, as long as Hamas has one AK-47, Israelis are in jeopardy.
Yes, well, I think most people don't realize that while Hamas is focused primarily on Israel, it is a terror organization with a huge amount of, let's say, sympathetic links, support, and pipelines around the world. And they could very, very easily, if they're in a position of being, as you say, with all the deference due an actual state, they could very easily start exporting that if they felt that their interest would be best served by applying terroristic pressure in other countries.
As long as Hamas is a viable institution, as long as there's one Hamas person who wants to kill Israelis, Israel is in jeopardy.
Yes, it's a very stern warning, I guess, isn't it, for what could possibly happen. Now, we're going to be back with Dave after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain Mark Angelides, and Dave Patterson remains Dave Patterson, Liberty Nation's national security correspondent. So, Dave, thanks for sticking around. We were talking earlier in the show about what it means that the UK, Canada, and Australia decided to not so much acknowledge that there should be a two-state solution and that Palestinians deserve a state, but really they're trying to push the ball forward on that and coming into, what would you say, like a congruence with a lot of other nations. Now, there are two really notable nations that are not backing this kind of rhetoric at the moment. Number one is obviously Israel, which we've discussed. It's from an Israeli perspective, it's a terrible idea to have an actual state on your doorstep that wants to destroy you, assuming that Hamas would have something to do with that state, which they probably would, because how can you tell if somebody's Hamas or Hamas sympathetic? It's almost impossible, I think. But there's also, and this is the most important one, the United States. So the United States hasn't gotten on that train under President Donald Trump. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's unlikely that President Trump will get on this train, as you put it. He has a relationship with Netanyahu. I think he agrees with Netanyahu that any sort of a Palestinian state that neighbors Israel is really an existential threat to Israel. And because once you let that idea percolate and become real, now again, Israel is faced with a real Palestinian state that really is cohesive in its desire to destroy them. Have you ever heard a single Palestinian leader say, yes, I think Israel should be a country, and I agree that they should be a legitimate entity, and we would see a way to have peace with them? Have you ever heard that?
Well, no, but I have heard from the river to the sea, which would essentially negate the existence of any Israeli nation, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's sort of a clue, I think. As you're looking at this, that there's very little chance that there would be a benevolent Palestine on the borders of Israel. And Israel has fought this battle since 1947. And they're going to be pretty hard to convince otherwise.
Dave, you and I are big fans of the wonderful author James Clavell.
Yes.
Who wrote for those of you who are not totally familiar with him, he wrote the Taipan book, which was of the Asian Saga, the book series there. And there's Shogun. There's a big TV show made of Shogun now, which it's surprisingly good. The lead actors in that are fantastic. But the last book in the Asian Saga by James Clavell was called Whirlwind. Obviously, Dave knows this. I'm just giving this exposition for our audience here, and it was about 1979 in Iran and the downfall and the rise of the Islamist state that we see today. And the last couple of pages in that, Dave, and you'll remember this. It's one guy. I think he's a mujahideen of some description. He's wandering off with his horse or his donkey, and he's thinking to himself that, and this is how he puts it, that these foreigners, these Westerners, they're willing to give so much for one single life that there's no way they can ultimately beat us, because that, I guess you'd call it, what would you say? That reverence for even a single life doesn't mean anything in the greater cause of things for us. And so we'll always win. And that was written it was written after 1979, of course. But I think that holds very, very true for right now, that if there are, and what's happening, that's how Hamas really prosecutes their war against the Israelis. They don't care about a single life, an individual life, the Hamas terrorists. They use civilians, women, children, non-combatants as human shields. They put them in places that are likely to get bombed because they're storing weapons caches there. And then they weep about it to a friendly media and say, look at the horrible things they're doing. They're aiming at these buildings where there are women and children that they've put there specifically to elicit sympathy. And so they're willing to sacrifice all the lives they can in their cause. Whereas most Western, I think all Western nations view this as this is the wrong thing to do. But it does put Israel in a very tricky situation, doesn't it, Dave? Because unless they're willing to engage in that kind of war brutality, and some would say that they already are. But of course, really they could just carpet bomb. If they really wanted to just kill all the Palestinians, they could just carpet bomb Rafah, for example. But unless they're willing to engage in that kind of war fighting, is there any way that they can actually get rid of Hamas root and branch?
It's going to be very difficult. I mean, there's no question about that. But at the same time, I think that there's this interesting dynamic between Israel and the United States. As long as President Trump and the United States National Security Team does not come out specifically and say, stop doing this, you can't do this anymore, they're going to provide the weapons whereby Israel can, in fact, start to clean out Hamas to the very last person. And yes, you're right. I mean, but remember the Western ethos, for want of a better term, during World War II. We were perfectly happy to carpet bomb Dresden. We used 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, because at the time, the sign of the times was that if you don't do this, you will have this terrible, terrible cancer with you forever and will cost you hundreds of thousands of people. And to your point, yes, they don't care. I mean, they are in fact a death cult. And they act like one, they talk like a death cult. And so you have to look at them that way. And in the end, it's very, it's really awful to say, but we've got more bullets than you've got people.
Yes. Well, by we, I presume you mean Israel with the support
Help
of
the United States, of course.
Yeah. It's. I don't see any way out of a tragic situation, but I do see it continuing almost indefinitely, because how do you defeat an ideology, even one that's predicated on, even one so bad that it's predicated on the death of another people? I don't see how you root that out, because it's not, and we should really talk about this. What kind of effect this announcement that UK, Australia, and Canada are supporting the creation of a Palestinian state, like what kind of effect that will have on the wider Arab world around Israel? Because there were a few years ago there were signs of progress with the Abraham Accords that I thought would really be. I really thought that there was something happening there that could bring everything together. But Hamas exists because it has the support of its neighboring states. I mean, we've seen this. The leadership of Hamas, they go off to other countries where they get put up in top hotels and treated like royalty, only to come back and continue waging war. I guess my question is, what are the other Arab states around the area? Are they thinking that this benefits them, or are they thinking deep down, and I suspect this is true to some level, that they're also terrified of Hamas being in control of Palestinians, that they might want a Palestinian state for Palestinian people, but the idea that Hamas could, pull back and pretend that it's not Hamas and then end up in charge of an actual country. Aren't they a little bit frightened by that? Because
I think they are, and I think that's why you have Egypt saying, "Don't bring Palestinians into Egypt." Jordan says, "Don't bring Palestinians into Jordan." I think that's exactly why. It's very interesting. I was at a conference not too many years ago, and I was talking with the ambassador. One of the Arab countries, their ambassador to the EU. And I said, I don't understand what's going on here, because here you have the United Arab Emirates, you have Qatar, you have Kuwait, and they have all these big building programs. Why don't you invite Palestinians down to be guest workers in all these programs? And she looked at me and she said, oh, if they left Palestine, the Israelis would take their land. What? But that's their thought process.
yeah,
And I think that's kind of the mythology that they like, this victim ethos that they like to project of how poor me, and yet they're the ones who actually are helping to promulgate the problems that are going on in the region.
Dave Patterson, thanks ever so much for being with us. And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests today, Mr. James Fight and Dave Patterson, and of course extend my sincerest thanks to you, the listeners, who take the time each and every week to tune in and join us here on the show. Please do remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.